Snehar has asked how to get over the problem of overthinking. It's an important question, and the very question denotes that thinking in itself is fine. The problem arises when it becomes overthinking. And I agree with this thing. Thinking only becomes a problem if it is unstoppable. If there is a perfect balance of thinking and non-thinking, then our mind has a certain harmony to it, a melody to it. However, if your mind is never silent, never at rest, you lose the harmony. Then your mind simply becomes like a noise of constant mental chatter that you don't even know how to shut off. And it's a very torturous state of being. And the problem is that in our society, overthinking is not even considered as a problem. Why? Because it is imperceptible. A small sprain in your ankle will get you much attention and care from others, only because it is noticeable. People can see you limping. But nobody can gaze into your interiority, into your thought processes, and hence so many people simply suffer silently because of this overthinking. And there are so many people walking around us with their head on fire, but all that goes unnoticed. I'm talking about all this because as a society, we should become more sensitive towards people who are going through these episodes of overthinking. As a society, we should also become aware about it. So if you have someone around you who is suffering from this problem, you should become more compassionate towards that person. Now let's try to understand what overthinking is and whether there is a way of completely dropping it. The first thing to be understood in this context is that the capacity to think is a tremendous gift that human beings have. In fact, this powerful faculty is what differentiates us from other animals, and it has been a decisive factor in our evolution. However, like anything in this existence, thinking also falls under the duality of being creative and destructive. When there are thoughts in right measures, a harmony happens. Then thought simply becomes an expression of poetry, art, music, science, and all kind of innovations. There is creativity. But if there is thinking in wrong measures, if there is overthinking, then you start suffering your own thoughts. Then you simply start suffering your own intelligence. Something that could have been used very creatively becomes destructive. Your intelligence turns against you. And why does it actually happen? To go into it, we'll have to understand the nature of thoughts. If you're going to pay close attention to your thoughts, you will find that all the thoughts have one thing common about them. They are either of the past or of the future. And the capacity to learn from the past or envision the future is a tremendous intelligence if done rightly. But too much concern about future and past simply takes you away from the reality of this moment. Overthinking simply means that you are living too much in your head, in fiction, and less in reality. That's it. You are not rooted in reality. In the moments when you are overthinking, one thing is certain, that you are missing out on whatever is happening in the present moment. You are missing out on the whole beauty of this moment, and you are stuck somewhere. You're caught somewhere in your mind. Your mind creates a web of reality, a constructed reality, and you're trapped in it. Just pay attention to your thoughts. What are they all about? There is no creativity in them. Somebody insulted you and you got hurt, and now you're remembering that thing over and over again, and it's running on loop in your head. You're just pondering over how you could have reacted differently in that moment. It's maddening. You're weaving stories about the future. What if this happens or that happens? You're unnecessarily wasting your mental energy in trivia. And majority of the things that are cooking up in your head might never actually happen in your life. Majority of the things that you are worried about will simply happen in your head, never in reality. I remember a philosopher once saying this very same thing, that my life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. This quote sums up what overthinking is all about. You are unnecessarily suffering for the things that might never ever happen in your life. If you can see this thing clearly, then all the rubbish that goes on in your head will simply disappear on its own accord. You won't have to do anything directly with it. And remember, you cannot stop thinking at your own will. Why? Because there is just thinking. There is no thinker doing the thinking. If there was one, then anyone could have stopped thinking. And I don't want to go into it right now because it requires a great deal of attention and inquiry. I simply want to leave you with a point so that you can become a little more curious about it. Now, coming to the question of how to stop overthinking, let me tell you this thing right away, that all efforts to stop thinking are simply futile. You cannot stop thinking. The philosopher Alan Watts used to talk about the law of reverse effect. He used to say that if you try to float, you sink, but if you sink, you float. And the same law applies here, the law of reverse effect. If you try to stop thinking, you will have more and more thoughts. Your mind will be simply flooded with enormous amount of thoughts. You will become more and more anxious. Why? Because the very attempt to stop thoughts is a thought in itself. And with one thought, more thoughts are bound to breed. Then you will start thinking that, why can't I stop thinking? Something must be wrong with me, or there must be a method or a technique that is better than the technique that I'm using right now. So you will become more and more anxious about this whole thing, and overthinking will simply become a much deeper problem for you. But instead of doing anything directly with the thoughts, if you can simply become passively aware about them, then the miracle happens. A passive awareness is needed to understand the futility of these thoughts, that majority of your thoughts are simply useless in nature. A passive awareness is needed to become disidentified with these thoughts, because most of the times you have this illusion that you are consciously thinking these thoughts. These thoughts are simply happening. So next time if you are going through any episode of overthinking, just simply become aware, passively aware of the whole thought process without any intent of doing anything about it. If thoughts are there, it's fine, pay attention to them. If there are no thoughts, fine, pay attention to them. This is the secret. If you can do this thing, then you will never ever suffer overthinking in your life. Then all the thoughts will start disappearing on their own accord. You don't have to do anything directly with it. And I remember a story from Buddha's life, which is very similar with this law of reverse effect. Once Buddha was traveling with few of his disciples, and there was a lake nearby. Buddha was very thirsty. So he asked one of his disciples to get some water from the lake. The disciple walked up to the lake, and when he reached the lake, right in that moment, a bullock cart was passing. And the whole water became muddy and it was not fit to drink. So he got back to Buddha and he said that the water is really muddy. I couldn't bring it. Buddha said, sit down. But after some time, Buddha asked him again, go and get the water. This time the water was clear and the disciple got a pot full of water and Buddha drank it. And after drinking, Buddha simply asked the person that how did the water become clear? Was any effort needed? And the disciple answered, no. If you don't do anything to the water, then eventually the mud simply settles down. And Buddha said, this is what actually happens with our mind also. When the mind is disturbed, when the mind is going through the process of overthinking, if you don't do anything about it, if you don't make an effort, then it will simply settle down on its own accord. So Snehar, I hope that you had an insight into what overthinking is, and you will not do anything directly to deal with it. You would rather become more and more passively aware about them. And I wish you all the best for that.